You know, as a critic, I know that all opinions are ultimately subjective. Even the most unbiased review has at least a bit of subjectivity, which is why I've come to despise the term overrated. Objectivity doesn't truly exist in criticism. Objectivity does exist in some circumstances. For example, my TV stand is objectively made out of wood, and there are some things that are so close to being objective that they might as well be, like, for example, Superman 64 is shit, but I guarantee there's someone out there who likes Superman 64, probably based on nostalgia. And they probably grew up in a cavern and survived by licking the moisture from the walls. But at heart, criticism is based off of opinions, and opinions are subjective. However, the term overrated is an objectivist term, and in many cases the use comes across as pretentious. The definition of overrated is to have a higher opinion of someone or something than is deserved. My problem is, criticism is extremely subjective, but the term overrated is an objectivist term, basically or usually translating to, everyone likes this thing, but I don't, but I'm right because my opinions are all that matters, and everybody else in the world is wrong for reasons. It drives me up the wall to hear the term overrated as a term of my opinion is the only true opinion, because it really does boil the majority of people's thoughts of the subject in question down to wrong because I arbitrarily say so, which is the most disrespectful thing you can say to someone in regards to what they say or think. And yet so many reviewers fall for this trap. Fuck, I won't say who, but this video was inspired by a single video. Once again, I won't say of what or by who because this guy's a friend of a friend, so he might skin me alive. Hell, even someone as big as JonTron once got into some very hot water for his video of the top 10 most overrated games, which for reference was the first video he deleted off the JonTron channel with the possible exception of apples and bricks. And I can understand why. The entire video is spent with him saying in a very holier than thou kind of way why everybody's wrong and stupid, and doesn't really elaborate to any significant degree. It's pretty bad and would put any professional reviewer to shame. It's essentially JonTron's version of the Angel and the Gambler. While he makes some good points throughout, he never graduates beyond everybody's wrong about these games because I say so, and I hate to say it, comes across as douchey and pretentious. But I will say that I appreciate that he was man enough to delete the video and say he no longer stands by it. Presenting your findings as fact, that's fair enough, because what is criticism if not a presentation of what's right or wrong with a piece of media put through the filter of what one expects out of the media? Opinions may vary from person to person, but all the findings will be the same, and even the most basic level of criticism applies to a large portion of people. For example, a movie's pace is very important. A pace that's too slow is boring, and a pace that's too fast can be hard to follow. And while there are people who like pace in the extremes, roughly 90% of people fall somewhere in the middle. So if a movie's pace is too slow, the majority of people will take issue with it in varying degrees, and that's why criticism is so important. While everybody has different viewpoints, there are fundamental parts of the design to any piece of media that affects the enjoyment to 90% of people. So while the findings are at heart subjective, these kinds of findings and the quality thereof will apply to so many people's enjoyment of the media in question, because that doesn't really matter unless you're an outlier. So because so many people fall into generally the same part of the spectrum and only a select few will ever be in the extremes on any side of any argument or general opinion, when you yourself fall into the outer side of generality of thought patterns, it's unfair to say that these people are objectively wrong, which is why the term overrated comes across to me as so insulting. There might be some things that a lot of people are missing that may lead them to reconsider what they know about the media in question, but even in the most extreme examples, that's just someone putting forth a subjective bit of evidence to support their claim and doesn't invalidate the way anyone might think. But the term overrated goes completely against that philosophy because it is by nature such an objectivist term, whereas my philosophy is nothing is overrated because everything in theory has something to like to someone somewhere. Some things just happen to click more with other people or more people than others, and some people are by their very nature more conditioned to like certain things based on their personality. For example, I saw Mega Man X6 be played for the first time a while back, and I remember being in absolute awe of how atrocious and unfairly difficult some of the level design was. I said for the record that this is something I'd expect out of a ROM hack. 90% of people playing for the first time will fall into the spectrum of agreeing that it's unfair. But look at the comments section of any review of X6 and you'll see that there are people who enjoy that, mostly fanboys and masochists who don't get out much. I believe it's flawed, I believe it's badly made, but I don't think it's overrated because while I think it's absolutely moronic to like X6, it's absolutely your right to do so. Assuming you're not an absolute dick about it. If you believe that something popular is overrated, chances are that means the media in question for one problem or another doesn't fit into the spectrum of what you believe to be acceptable. There are some things that I feel are objectively bad designs, such as something that arbitrarily kills the player on a first playthrough or checkpoints before unskippable cutscenes, and in certain circumstances, overrated does make some sense. For example, I've heard Metal Gear Solid described as the most overrated sci-fi franchise, not because it's bad, but rather because it can't decide if it's sci-fi or not, what with the nanomachines and whatnot, but that's actually a statement that, while I personally disagree with, I can see where they're coming from. But those are examples of hard design and consistency, not criticism, and when talking about criticism, Overrated falls apart. For example, I don't like Final Fantasy VII, but I would never say it's overrated because clearly there's something here that I just don't get. Clearly there's an audience for this and I'm not part of it, or something like Mario Kart 64. I don't like Mario Kart 64, I think it controls badly, looks like shit, and has next to no content. Would I say it's overrated? No. Because with so many fans, clearly there's something here to like, and maybe if it wasn't built up as this holy messiah of kart racers, I'd have liked it more. How many people like it because of nostalgia alone? Who knows? Point is, I don't think it's overrated. I think it's built up so much by the people who claim its excellence that it could never possibly reach those heights and is ultimately a subpar kart racer. So personally, on that note, I would prefer the term overhyped. I think Mario Kart 64 is overhyped. I think Final Fantasy VII is overhyped. I think 90% of the Sonic franchise is overhyped. These are things that aren't objectively better or worse than anyone says, but rather are put on a pedestal, and so anyone in the know that aren't already knee-deep in the respective franchises will ultimately be disappointed for the most part. Overhyped is a subjective term that translates to this simply for one reason or another didn't reach my expectations. Underrated perhaps suffers from the same problems that overrated does, however I think underrated has more merit because overrated has one use and one use only. However, underrated can exist in two contexts, in the sense that it's overhated, something that everyone hates that one likes, which is objectivist and therefore is less valid of the two, although it does have slightly more validity than overrated because something can be the victim of the bandwagon effect. Underrated can also exist in the sense that it's lesser known but deserving of more credit, which does happen. Like for example, I could say that Beyond Good and Evil is underrated because it's a superb game that isn't often talked about. The same can be said about something like Dark Cloud or I don't know, fucking Drakengard. So the term underrated has at least a bit of merit in some circumstances, however I think the better term to use would be underappreciated because that encapsulates the intent behind underrated but without the implied objectivity. As for overrated, it needs to die in criticism like pronto. It's objectivist in a field that's entirely subjective. I want it to be replaced with overhyped because that gets the point across without it coming across as I'm right, you're all wrong, but rather more akin to this did not reach my expectations that was built up by the people who talked about it. It's more about the person talking rather than everybody else. I understand that telling the internet to do something is a one-way ticket to getting them to do the exact opposite because you're all uncreative fucks, but that's not the point I'm trying to raise here. All I'm trying to bring across here is that maybe as a culture we should rethink intentions and how we criticize. Like, we should act as though there are opinions other than our own, and we should not act as though our opinions are the objective. So if you think that, say, Super Mario Odyssey is overrated, you're not wrong for disliking it, but you're sure as hell wrong for saying people are wrong for liking it, which is what you're basically saying by calling it overrated. So we as a culture should stop using the word overrated and start using similar words with similar intentions that are less objective, like overhyped, because the word overrated is itself, ironically, overrated. Tell me how I'm overrated in the comment section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. TGX over, out, and I'll see you next time.